We'll just start anyways. Third time's a charm? Yeah, right. So, we're doing a talk today, turning your idea into reality for the third time. Like I said, the subtext hint, it's not easy. I am going to kind of go into my story. I tried to embark down this path, and I want to talk a little bit about the trials and the tribulations of doing that, and hopefully come out of this talk telling everyone here that how much easier it is to make an app today that's available for the entire world, even though it's still really hard. So why apps? Writing code is a skill that I'm good at. I think that it's probably the closest thing that I have to being good at enough at something to be able to try to change the world in a positive way. I really enjoy writing code. I like when things come together. To me, it feels a little bit like building things with my hands, even though I'm not physically building anything. I'm building software. It's still really fulfilling to me. I think apps are a disruptive technology, so think things like Napster. Even though Napster, when it came out, it was illegal at the time, it did change the entire music industry. They came under a lot of flack from the music industry, and the music industry really resisted them and tried to get them to go away. But at the end of the day, they innovated the entire music industry, and now we have things like iTunes where you can buy individual songs for 99 cents in the entire music, or you can buy Spotify or Google Music that gives you music for any song you want from the entire global library of music for $10 a month. So another thing is like I said, it's something I think that I can use to make my impact in the world, and it can be done relatively low cost. I really when I was starting to make an app, I wanted to do something that was really lean, that didn't cost a lot, something I could do on my own. So you have a great idea. That's where it starts. The light bulb comes on in your head. Look at how happy everybody is. Okay, so you're feeling inspired. You have an idea. You're like, oh man, I have such a good app idea. I can't wait to start to get to work on this. I'm going to make the best thing. I know what it is I want to work on. And then you start to look at the actual problem. It's like anyone can draw a picture of a helicopter, but that helicopter won't fly. And if you want to make a helicopter that flies, it's orders of magnitude more difficult to make that a reality. And it's the same for an app. You might have an idea, and in your head, it's like, if I can make this work, the whole world will use it. But then with software, with apps in particular, you got to start to think about, oh, what am I going to do for my front end? What am I going to do for my back end? What language am I going to pick? How do I host that front end? How do I host that back end? What am I going to use? What server hardware? I mean, am I going to need to have a server? Am I going to need to do all that? And that's just the first part. Okay, then you got to think about, where am I going to store all my data? I got to have a database somewhere. Am I going to run that database? What database is it going to be? How do my users interface with the back end and the database? How do they call in? I got to make a REST API, and I got to build all that and hook that all up and do all the authentication there as well. I mean, all the different things that are tied into logging in and signing up and all that entire authentication story. And then we have things like social login, which is like, what if someone wants to log in from Facebook or Google or any of the other myriad of social logins? What about your continuous integration and delivery system? How do you make it so that you can get, as a developer, you can actually get your code out to people and really iterate really quickly on your code towards a minimum viable product? And then make things even more difficult, like what about your mobile and your desktop UI? And these days you have to support both. And then lastly, and this is like even more of a crazy thing, will it scale? Like, is this something that you can expose to the entire internet of things, and then everyone can use this? Or is it going to be a total, or is it just basically running on your server in your closet, and it's essentially going to be a pet project that can support about 100 users, and then once you get a link on Reddit, the whole thing comes on? Not speaking from experience, though. So it quickly turns into pretty much, well, this is practically impossible. As you can see, you just throw your papers and give up. But no, it won't do that. feelings this as well. I certainly felt this when I was embarking down that path, building an app. I had no idea what I'm doing. I felt like everything was, you kind of wish when you're building an app that some part of it is going to be easy, that there's going to be a part that you're like, oh yeah, this was just like an hour, it was easy, I expected it to be easy, and it was easy. No, everything is kind of difficult, so it's a lot of learning and a lot of research. And then finally, after doing all that, you kind of you may fall into the pit of despair, as I call it. So all of these feelings, it's a roller coaster of feelings when you're first trying to build an app, looking at all the things that are out there and realizing that, oh yeah, this is going to be a lot harder than I first thought it was going to be. So what actually happened there, it's called analysis paralysis. And it's an individual process when overanalyzing or overthinking a situation can cause forward motion or decision making to become paralyzed, meaning that no solution or course of action is decided upon. And that's exactly what happened. I was looking at different databases, I was looking at different front ends, different back ends, all of these different things, and you could spend probably months to years just researching this stuff and never actually doing anything. There's so many options to choose from, and really it happens to the best of us. You know, you want to try and do this thing, and then you get stuck thinking about, oh, should I use that stack or should I use this stack? It's really hard to choose. But let's take a step back for a second and try and break down the problem that we have here. I always find that when something seems overwhelming and impossible to achieve, you really need to break down the problem. It's like staring at a mountain from a mile away. From a mile away, you just see a mountain, you're like, that's impossible. But when you start to get closer and closer to it, you realize that there is a way. Once you get close enough to the mountain, you realize there's a way. Oh, I can go up that way a little bit. I can go up that way a little bit. You can break down the problem and take it in chunks. So we have a little circle, and that's the thing you want to work on. That's the idea that initially inspired you. That's what you want to do. And then you have this enormous circle. All the other stuff you need to do before you can even start working on that thing that got you inspired in the first place. So that can be really disheartening. That can be really block you in trying to get to that thing you want to work on. If we're going to do this, if we're going to build an app, you have to spend the most amount of time as possible working on that thing you actually want to work on, because the more you work on that, the more you accomplish on that, that's the thing that's really, that really you want to work on. So how do we focus on that? How do we put our energy into that? So there has to be a better way. So to be successful in building an app, we need to focus as much of our time as possible solving our novel problem. That means solving the thing that made us inspired and was that light bulb in our head in the first place. Now, to do that, we need to use as many low or no cost off-the-shelf solutions as possible to fill in that big circle. You're not going to go write all these things for yourself, because you won't get to the thing you actually wanted to do for like 5 years. Basically, we want to do as little work as possible. I mean, programmers, Bill Gates once made a quote about hiring people who are lazy, because lazy programmers will find the solution the fastest, or they'll do the easiest thing to get to the solution, which is maybe not necessarily, doesn't mean you're lazy, it just means you're efficient. But also we have that nice quote from Carl Sagan at the bottom there: if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe, which is kind of funny, I think. So how do we avoid having to create the entire universe just to get the thing we want to get? So how do we do it? In today's day and age, I think it's pretty obvious now. It's the cloud. Amazon Web Service, it's Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform. There's a couple different ones. You pick one and you find tutorials from there. There's going to be tutorials on each one of those that take you through the entire process of creating your front end your backend, your database, all your authentication, and they're all of those platforms are going to have all the things you need to really get yourself the pieces in place. That it's like, if you want to paint a picture, you don't want to have to build the frame for the picture. You want to go get that frame pretty much and just have a blank canvas. You don't want to have to build the canvas too. So these cloud providers do a lot of that legwork for you. But for this purposes, let's do a case study on AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. So our front end, it's easy. We take React.js. I'm not sure. We're going to jump into a little bit more about the technology that you choose to do these things, or that I chose to do these things. Why do we pick React.js? It's one of the most popular client-side frameworks today. It has a library called Amplify.js, which interfaces seamlessly with AWS. So you get a lot of that configuration stuff for free. See, he loves it. Yeah. He was using it the other day. Jared was using it, so it's pretty good. Like, there's a bunch of other front-end languages you can use. I picked React.js. It's fairly widely used in the industry. It has a lot of support. In my opinion, you can't really go wrong there. Then what do we do on the back end? Well, in this case, I use Node.js. Why? Because it's just JavaScript as well, and then you only have to learn one language for your back end and your front end, thereby cutting the amount of work you have to do in half, because you only need to know one programming language. Another thing is that it runs on AWS Lambda functions, and we'll talk about those right now. So AWS Lambda, if you've never heard of this, essentially it's just a part of the AWS platform that allows you to run functions. So you code your functions and upload them to AWS, and those functions run directly on AWS's servers. So you don't need to have that server in your closet, or you don't have to have your own server farm to run functions. It's referred to as serverless technology, and in my opinion, it's one of the things that has made app development and scalability more accessible to the individual person than ever before. It can also interact with other AWS resources like our database. So you can pick anything. All of these exist within AWS. You can pick your relational databases, which are SQL, your NoSQL databases like DynamoDB, or blob storage, something like S3. These are all different places where you can store data, and these are all accessible in AWS through Lambda functions. Now we also need a REST API. Amazon does this too. They do it all. So do all these other cloud providers. But how do external users call these Lambda functions? Well, we use this thing called API Gateway in another AWS service, and we put it all together, all the things we've talked about, and we get a computer on the left there. That's our React client running React.js on the front end. It interfaces with API Gateway through Amplify.js, which is a library we install on the front end. API Gateway handles all of your REST calls into your Lambda functions. So you make a REST call from the client, it goes to the API Gateway, and then it goes to your Lambda, and that runs a function. And that can be any function you want. You can upload the entire amount, all the different functions you have in your application can all run on Lambda. They're small, they're compact, and those functions can make a call to a backing store. It could be SQL. In this case, if you put DynamoDB, it tends to have better scaling characteristics, but don't worry too much about what we have on the very far right side there. Just think about it as a place where you can put your data. So authentication, okay? So how do we handle account creation and signing, reset passwords, and sending verification emails? What about social login, like we said before? Seriously, you could spend many months just doing all that. That would become your project if you were to do that. I mean, take it from me when I was working on this. I was surprised by all the different flows in authentication that you had to handle. Even using Amazon Cognito, which is what I did. They do your Facebook and Google login. They'll do your regular. If a user wants to create an account in your application, they can handle that. But I mean, I couldn't imagine if I had to write all of that myself and do all the security around that, it would just have been an absolute impossibility if I wanted to actually accomplish it. And this is a nice slide. Just take a second to read that, because as in the industry, we always get asked this question, well, will it scale? And they just ask that question. Sometimes they don't even know what they're asking. It's just such a buzzword. But seriously, will it scale? It's a question we need to ask ourselves. And the answer is yes, it will scale for the most part. I mean, there's some caveats here, but for the most part, Lambda functions will scale with load, meaning that as more people use your website, as more people are interacting with your UI, with your front end, Lambda is going to spin up new servers to handle requests as needed. Now, the one thing you will, I mean, your bottleneck is always going to be your database. Can your database scale? DynamoDB, it's going to be a bit better. Something that's SQL-based, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. But seriously, imagine managing the hardware to do that yourself. Imagine if you are the one doing the servers and you're the one scaling up the servers and adding new servers. I mean, like, seriously, just try and imagine how hard that would be. Exactly. No, we're not doing that. That's insane. We're not. Yeah, look at that. That's how I felt. It's like, I'm not doing that. It's like, that's a whole other project on its own. If we want to try to build an app, we have to eliminate doing other projects first. That big circle. We have to try to eliminate what's happening in there. So we're getting there. There's still some other things we have to ask ourselves. Luckily, there are tools out there available. They're very low cost. Actually, I don't think any of these cost anything. I'm using them right now. They don't cost anything. But where are we going to host our front end? So you have a React app on your machine. That's great. Where are you going to deploy that to so that people can hit it from the internet? Well, there's a pretty nice website to do that. It's called Netlify. You push your code there, and it deploys to the internet. It's accessible over your domain name, which is another thing you can do. Where are you going to host your backend? So how are you going to get you write your functions in whatever language you want. How do you get them to Lambda? How do you get them to AWS? So there's a nice sort of product you can use called Seed. It's available at seed.run. That's what I use. I found it to be really, really nice. Source code, I mean, I use GitLab, you can use GitHub, you can use Bitbucket, you can use any. They all have the integrations you need. There's other concerns too, like your CI/CD system. That's like, okay, if I make a change in my code base and I want to get that to the internet, how do I do that? So the nice thing about Netlify is that if you make a change to your code and you push it to your version control and you make a pull request, Netlify will automatically deploy that to a URL that you can reach. So you can really quickly iterate on features or anything. You can really quickly iterate. And that's a really important part in being able to develop an app. You need to iterate as quickly as possible. But there's a couple other concerns too. It's like you need your dev and prod environments. So if you're trying to test something, you don't push it to prod right away. I mean, most people do push it to prod right away, but you shouldn't. You should put it in dev first, test it in dev, make sure it works there, and then push it to prod when you know that you're releasing something that's not going to be a pile of garbage. And then you also got to do your domain name and your SSL certs, and that was kind of a pain in the butt, but there's enough tutorials out there. If you've made it that far, you can get your domain name and your SSL certs and then hook that up. That'll get hooked up through Netlify as well. But really, all of the things I've talked about here are must-haves in this day and age for the web. These are things that you have all these users who are using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everything. And these are de facto features that any user who uses the internet is going to expect to have in an app in today's day and age. So the bar is set really high. And as a single person, I don't think we have the bandwidth to get there on our own unless we are using tools that exist on the markets that can fill up that big circle. And then these are also must-haves for every dev who needs to deliver these features quickly to your users. So that's a wrap. Yeah, that's kind of overwhelming, I know. There's a lot to kind of take in there. This is a very high level sort of talk about all of the different things. But let's just take a step back and look at what we actually were able to accomplish. So look at that big circle now. Instead of it being filled with things that you need to do yourself, we filled it with off-the-shelf commodities that you can use so that you can actually spend your time working on the things you want to work on, actually working on the novel problem that got you excited in the first place. And the stuff in the bigger circle, we didn't want to do anyways. And if we would have had to do it, we would not have enjoyed it. We've used solutions that are low to no cost, and so we can actually spend our time focusing on the problem we actually wanted to solve in the first place. And that's the most important part of all of this, is you want to work on the thing that inspires you, because you're going to get to the point where you realize there's a million different other things you have to do, and you're going to find that there's a million different frameworks out there to solve them, and you just need to pick something. And in this case, we've picked a certain set of technologies, and there's a little bit more to that I'll add as well. So the idea here isn't to say it's really easy to make apps now. It's not, and it's never been, but it's much less hard. It's never been more accessible than it is today for a single person to create a web application that can scale to many millions of users. A single person. You can do it yourself. I have a link there. It's to a website called serverless-stack.com. It is literally a tutorial that will take you from step one until deployed to the internet, and it will go through in detail everything that I've talked about. I used their tutorial to get to where my app there, it's takeissue.app. It's basically running on all of the technologies that I just spent the last little while talking about. And like I said, there's other cloud providers out there. Josh, for example, likes to harp on Firebase, and I'm sure it's pretty good as well. I would like to go down that road as well, but for the most part, it is much less hard to do this. And if we can build a community of mentors, then I think that it's going to be. I mean, if you have ideas and you want to do this, I think if there's a network of people to kind of help you down that path, that we can start to create some really cool apps. Also, if going to a website and reading and trying to, if that's not your preferred way of learning and you're interested, come to me after the talk. I've been shopping around the idea of doing a workshop, a series of workshops that will take people through all the steps to kind of get to an app that can be deployed to the internet. And lastly, my name is Erik Petersen, and other than that, let's jump into a Q&A. Just put your hand up if you want to ask a question. Yeah, Alistair, what's up?
So we're at the stage where you're adding continuous integration to do you suggest that people should do that at the very start of that development, or somewhere along the way they have a little bit of the other goods?
So Alistair's asking if you should pursue a continuous integration and delivery pipeline from the very beginning, or if you can get away with not doing that at the very beginning and then adding it on at the end. You could go either way. I mean, if you push it off till after you've done some things, maybe that makes it a little bit less work up front for you. Personally, I think it's an absolute must-have from the very beginning. I cannot emphasize how much faster it is for me to iterate on new features and bug fixes by having a continuous integration delivery pipeline. It's really easy to set up, actually. It's surprisingly easy to set up. So I would definitely recommend, my personal recommendation would be to do that at the very beginning and just have that from the get-go. One, yeah?
Out of all the pieces that you were discussing, what was like the most difficult part that you remember having?
Every part's the most difficult part to to do. I mean, even though you're not building these things yourself, you are still having to go through the process of learning how to use these things, learning how to integrate them with the other parts of your application. It's a lot easier, right, than building it yourself, but it's still time, it still takes work. Of all the things, I would say that the hardest part of all this is going to be your novel problem. That's the hard part. That's the part where you're truly trying to innovate. None of these things in the big circle are really innovative parts of your application. They're just parts of your application that you need to have in today's day and age, and that would take you forever to do completely on your own. So, no, really, for me, probably it's definitely the novel problem. Doing that, solving that, implementing that, and continually iterating to make it better is always, I think, going to be one of the hardest parts. Any other questions? Yeah.
So when you're developing one system, do these low-cost technologies be transferable from, let's say, Windows to Android, or Windows to Android, or Android to PC, Mac?
Yeah, so the question is, can these services that these commercial solutions, services that I'm using, can they be used cross-platform? Can you use it on Mac? Can you use it on Windows? Can you use it on your mobile? So the big point there is that the only thing that really needs to work on your Android, your iPhone, your Mac, your Windows machine is that the important part to know is that the front end is accessible through a web browser. So it's not a native application and you end up with after going through all this work. It's a web application accessible through your browser. And the really nice thing, and it's like one of the things you need to think about when you're building an application, is it going to work on a desktop? Is it going to work on a mobile device? So maybe that's one of the things that was really difficult, is making sure that the UI functions properly, regardless of whether you're on a desktop browser or a mobile browser. And actually, now that I think about it, it was really difficult. It's really hard to make those things work, especially if you're trying to do it all on your own. Now, React.js you can use a number of UI frameworks, and the one that I used was called Bootstrap UI, and that gives you really good mobile and desktop support right out of the box. You get that pretty much for free. All the server stuff is running on Amazon. It doesn't really care what operating system you're using, desktop or mobile. It's really just delivering data over a REST API to a client, and the client is the thing that is the cross-platform piece there. So, yeah, this full stack of technology is transferable all over the place. Wherever you want to use it, you can use it. Tablet, desktop, mobile, it works. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm looking over there, and the people on the couch are really comfy, but you got any questions? Dan, you got a question?
Why did you use React.js instead of something like ClojureScript?
So there's a lot of different front-end languages that you can pick from. Like I said, there's Vue, there's React, there's Angular, and this is the kind of paralysis thing you can get yourself into. You spend many hours going down the rabbit hole of each of these languages, and you don't pick one. For me, it was just like, I spent a lot of time doing that until I came to serverless stack. And they said use React. I looked at it, it seemed like a good idea. It's very well widely used in the industry, so I just went with React.js. There's some really nice patterns in that. I mean, you got to think back in time to how we used to build front ends, how we used to build UIs. I mean, it used to be you're just using straight up jQuery, CSS, and HTML. You're building your own UI framework from scratch. You might be using a templating engine like back in the day. I used to use something called Mustache, but I mean, you have to use something that's a commercial solution, a low to no cost thing. You use things like React, and it's a really nice way to develop applications on the internet, and it's been something that's plagued a lot of people for a long time, but React goes a long way to making it a lot better. Now, having said all that, I'd love to do a little side project with ClojureScript, or Vue, or Angular, or whatever. Like, I think it would be interesting, but yeah, it's you really just have to pick something and go with it and get good at using it. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you have any experience with the other platforms, Azure?
Yeah, so the question is like, do I have any experience with any of the other cloud platforms? I do have some experience with Google Cloud Platform. It's been used at the job that I'm working at in the industry, but also not really too much experience with Azure. I find AWS to be pretty nice to work with. One thing in particular is that's really, really, really nice is the Amplify.js library, which seamlessly connects your React application with all of those services on the back end, like your API gateway, your Lambdas, and your backing database. So, but I mean, they're all making huge advances all the time, and you could do whatever one you want. But in my case, it was all done on Amazon. All told, the whole stack that I talked about cost me $30 a month, and it's exposed to the entire world. Not that the entire world uses it, but if I could probably scale up to a couple million users, which as an individual, I think it would have been really hard to do even 3 or 4 years ago. Any other questions? Jared, do you have a question? No? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Thank you for being here. It's nice to see everyone out, and we'll do this again in a month, and one of you is going to be the one who does the